Hello everyone. For this month's Book of the Month, I have read Ready Player 2 by Shira. Now, this is not a sequel to Ready Player 1. If you pick this up and you're expecting a sequel to a dystopian story, you're going to be horribly disappointed and probably incredibly confused. This book is about marketing towards female gamers, and also a little bit of a gender study on how women, particularly in this case, and I'll explain this in a second, how player 2 actually has leisure time and what games that they play. Now, to get the definitions out of the way first, Chess says that player 1 is sort of the middle-aged white male who plays mostly like console games and that sort of things, also PC games. So this is like the way that that companies are marketing. They're marketing towards this fictional player 1. Player 2 is another fictional person who's sort of the working adult woman who maybe doesn't have hours to sit down and play video games. They maybe have like snippets of time, as she explains. So they might have, say, like a half an hour here or like 30 minutes, like 15 minutes here. Player 2 has more responsibilities than player 1. As Chess explains in her book, sort of women are seen as having almost two jobs. They have their working professional job, and then they're sort of expected through the gender roles that we have to go home and work their second job, which is sort of taking care of the household, taking care of their children. The male in that situation is seen as being, and this is sort of reinforced by research that she had. Well, it's not sort of, it is reinforced by the research that she has in this book, where men tend to have more leisure time, and we usually use it differently, specifically talking about the gamer demographic. Just from reading like her definitions and everything, I was like, oh my god, I am player 1, which kind of makes me feel bad about myself, but I also show aspects of this fictional player 2 as well. And when I say fictional, I mean it's literally like a person that she's created to sort of embody player 2. She didn't do the same with player 1 because the book's not about player 1, it's about player 2, who she refers to as Jennifer in the book. Now, there are some blurred lines in this, but for the most part I do agree with what she's saying. The way that video games are marketed, they are geared towards young adult men, usually like between like 18 and 24. That's generally like the core demographic, because those are seen as people who have more free time to play things. Also earlier teenagers as well, like 17 to 12, that sort of thing. Most games are not marketed towards women because it's not really seen in the industry as being, you know, they're probably not going to play like Call of Duty, they're probably not going to play like Monster Hunter World, they're probably not going to play this. That's not necessarily true, and there are large segments of outliers in this. But for the purpose of this book, she's just talking about how those games are marketed. Now, she goes into a few other things, and a lot of the games she talks about are sort of like the mobile games, or sort of those you don't really have a set objective, or the objective can be completed in a shorter period of time. These aren't like the RPGs that you sit down and you can play for like 7 or 8 hours and not really complete the game. I do not recommend you sitting down and playing a game for 7 or 8 hours, like seriously go outside. But it's very interesting reading this, and it reminds me an awful lot of a book that I had to read for a grad school class, except for this one is good, and the one I read for that class is absolutely horrible. So, yeah, this one is actually fairly short for one of these books, but it works very well because she doesn't repeat herself over and over again. The book's only about 170, 180 pages, if I remember correctly. But let me get into some of my issues with this. And I'll just... there are not many of them, and they're really just kind of nitpicks. The way she talks about some of these games, it's sort of like the genres, and I know the core genres, she breaks them down into different subsets, which do work for those games, but I always see them as being just casual games. And casual games have been around for a very long time. It's not anything new. I mean, you look at a game like Tetris, which has been around since the 80s, that one was basically marketed as being for the professional. That's somewhat how the Game Boy was marketed. Like, this is for the working professional who has to, like, sit on the metro or sit on the, in Japan, like, the bullet trains. And they don't have time to sit down and play a console game for a long period of time. They just have a short period of time to play. And she talks about this when she brings up the marketing for, like, the Nintendo DS. And I never really saw, like, the marketing for the Nintendo DS, specifically the DS Lite, where you would have, like, ads in basically women's magazines where it's like, she has a half an hour to play, like, what will you do with your time? And it would show a picture of a woman sitting in a doctor's office playing a DS, like, looking fairly happy while playing it, and then there are two people, like, staring at her enviously as they're just sitting there watching this. The connotation was, she's enjoying this game. She's sort of like that late 20s, early 30s person. You should also be playing it, because you can play these games and only spend like a half an hour and spend your little bits of time that you have down, when you can spend that time playing video games instead of necessarily doing other things, like just sitting there and waiting. Now, other parts of this, I don't really agree with some of her categorization of games. When she talks about certain games like Diner Dash, that type of thing has been around for a while. I think you could say Diner Dash made it more popular, but a lot of other games like that, in that mold, became popular as well. And they're still continuing to make similar games like that. And those she calls them time management games. I can see how that works. I would refer to them as sort of like more like a puzzle slash point and click adventure game. That's how I would see it, but we're getting into like arguing the genre of games here, which in my mind is kind of pointless at this point in time, because every game sort of blends genres with the exception of a few. Now, she does talk a little bit about marketing and how it got us to this point. In the 80s and 90s, women and girls were not the target of marketing for video games. It was just sort of like unheard of. Like, why would you market a game towards women at that point? With the exception of a few. And it was very, very blatant marketing. Like, they would get licenses for Barbie, or they would get licenses for other, what were seen as like girls' TV shows or that sort of thing, and they would just like spit out a game about it and be like, yeah, here you go, this will work for you. Those might have worked, but I've met just as many women who were like, I played Final Fantasy growing up, or I played Phantasy Star 4 growing up. I still do know quite a few women who played Final Fantasy VII when that came out, because pretty much everybody who had a PlayStation played Final Fantasy VII, with the exception of the people who didn't like JRPGs at the time. So overall, I really like this book. There's a lot of really good stuff in here. I wouldn't recommend it if you are just like a casual reader, because it goes into a lot of things that are probably going to anger some people, because she does talk a lot about, well, not really a lot, she does bring up Gamergate and talk about how that sort of was like a reaction to this mobile game and casual gamers, and unfortunately it targeted a lot of women in the industry for really erroneous reasons. a lot of people got upset, and this is not talking about the beginning of Gamergate, which was people who are upset about video game journalism, and then that was taken by a bunch of people who really... It was taken by people who were generally terrible human beings and said, oh yeah, he's talking about how women are terrible and are affecting the video game industry, which is stupid. I mean, women have been in the video game industry since the very beginning. Do you like the game Centipede? I hate to break this to you, but a woman programmed the game Centipede back in the 1980s. It happens. Like, you're never going... You can't discount the things that women have done for the video game industry by saying that they need to get out, because that's just ridiculous. Women have made plenty of wonderful games. There are a lot of female gamers who are very, very great people. There are some that suck, but there are a lot of guy gamers that suck as well, so you take the good with the bad. But, you know, she does bring that up, and so I had to mention it. And I tend to agree with her points on Gamergate. It was not a good time for being a gamer, and that's honestly why a lot of adults that play games don't necessarily identify themselves as gamers. And honestly, a lot of casual game players don't identify themselves as gamers. And I kind of laugh when people say that, oh, I'm not a gamer. I was like, oh, okay, so if I check your phone right now, I'm not going to find Candy Crush or any other game on there, but okay. In conclusion, though, she does talk a lot about some other things. Again, yeah, she's referring to how adults don't necessarily consider themselves gamers, and I understand that because in sort of like the gamer community, a lot of gamers sort of associate themselves with like the PC and console market, and they don't really care, or they sort of look down upon like the casual gamers, which isn't really, yeah, it really doesn't make any sense to me. They don't quite understand that without like the casual gaming audience, the gaming industry wouldn't be where it is today, because you need to get casual gamers in there. It's just like sports. You can't survive solely off of the hardcore fan base. You need to bring in casual fans. That's how you make more money. I mean, the gaming industry has me. If I pan the camera a little bit over, you're going to see just a wall of games that nobody's going to care about in like 20 years or so. But they don't necessarily have some of my friends who don't play all of these games, who just have like a few games on their phone, or they maybe have like, or they might buy like the Switch or something like that, or they bought the Wii a while ago and they don't really play that often. Or at least one story, I can't remember what podcast I heard this on, but they were talking about how how like adults would bring their kids into their game store and they wouldn't really know anything about video games, but they would have had a Game Boy growing up, and they maybe only had like Tetris and one or two other games. And that was kind of the trend for casual gamers. You bought the handheld system, and you maybe bought like one or two puzzle games to go along with it. That was another thing I sort of had an issue with Chess's book, is she doesn't really go into the handheld market that much. She doesn't really talk too much about the people who, well, no, she does. She does mention that people will buy a Wii, but it's not what her core argument was, so she doesn't focus as much time on it. People would buy the Wii because it was a party console, and that's sort of how Nintendo is marketing their systems now. They did it with, they had games called Mario Party on N64. They still make Mario Party. It's a lot of fun. But they started making a conscious effort to move away from marketing towards hardcore gamers, where they would have, we're going to throw 4 controller ports on our systems. Now we're going to make it so, I did forget about this, but she does mention it in her book, how the Wii was marketed towards or it's mothers who wanted to like bring their family together, and that's how Nintendo was marketing their later systems. It's how they market the Switch. To some extent, they market that as being, this is the party console. They do the same thing with the Wii. They're like, this is the party console. And I never noticed this with the Wii marketing, but this was, mothers, here's your console that you can easily learn to play with your kids to sort of grow more attached to them and everything. Which I didn't notice that at the time, because I wasn't really paying that much attention. I bought my Wii later on. But yeah, that's the way Nintendo is marketing their games. Is sort of, this is the social game platform that we want. We want to bring in those casual people, and we want to expand that market. We don't really, the hardcore market's not really that big of a deal. There are always going to be Nintendo fanboys like me, and I know I'm wearing a Sega Genesis shirt for a Sega Genesis game right now, but I'm a Nintendo fanboy as well. I grew up with it. Like, we're always going to be there for Nintendo. If they release a Mario game, we're going to buy it. If they release a Zelda game, I'm definitely going to buy it, 'cause Zelda's my favorite franchise for Nintendo. But not everybody's going to be into that, so they need to have, like, the Mario parties to say, hey Mom, this is a game that you can play with your kids. This is a game that you can, like, break out during your cocktail parties or other get-togethers and be like, hey, let's play Mario Kart, or let's do some other stuff, like some of the other party games they have. So that's sort of a little bit of the core thing that this book is getting at. It's saying, like, there are other things that gamers can do, and you don't have, and women aren't always like that. We're going to sit down and play this for a long period of time. And again, I'm talking about player 2 when I refer to women, and I'm very sorry about that, but it's the way you have to get around in this book. It's, I'm getting a little bit off topic here, and I'm sorry about that. But overall, this is a really good book. If you're into gender studies, if you are also into video games as well, you'll really like this book. There's a lot of great information in here. So if you get a chance, I would definitely read this book. If you don't really like gender studies and you don't like talking about marketing, then probably shouldn't get this. But, you know, this is a book that I could probably recommend to somebody if they want to, you know, like, expand their perspective on things, see how the industry sort of markets. Because she did do a lot of research on this book. She talked to a lot of people in the gaming industry and talked about how they do some workarounds to get do marketing towards women. This is a great book. It really, really is. Just, you know, there's more I can say about this, but honestly, you guys, if you're really interested in marketing, you should really get this book. If you're really interested in gender studies, you should get this book. Anyway, before I make this any more rambling and confusing, I'll just cut it off here. If you guys liked the video, just let me know in the comments. If you hated the video, let me know in the comments as well. I'm more than happy to have a discussion with you about why the video sucks. I'm not sure what book I'm going to read for next month, but yeah. Hopefully, I'm hoping it'll be as good as this one. You know, I'm not going to hold my breath because I do have some books that I'm not really looking forward to reading, but that's a little bit different. Anyway, again, you know, pick this up if you find it. If you're really into reading, great. Anyway, I will talk to you guys later, and have a good week.